I don't know if you ever thought this way, where you think, if only I had lived during the time of Jesus and seen what those people saw, I would believe more. But if I had experienced hearing the teaching of Jesus directly from him, if I had seen his miraculous things, I'd seen him raise people from the dead, quiet storms, make blind people see, if I had had those experiences, if I had seen and heard what those people saw and what they heard, then I would believe more. I'd be a more faithful follower of Jesus. Or in a similar vein, when I was in high school and I used to hear people's testimonies to Jesus, and some of them had dramatic testimonies. They were enslaved to some sort of sin or addiction, and then God moved in a powerful way, and then their whole lives were changed seemingly in a moment. They were so dedicated and faithful to God. And I used to think, I don't have a story like that. Nothing really dramatic like that happened. But if I had that story, if that had happened to me, I'd be more faithful. That person has an incredible story. And I would say to those sort of sentiments, the Lord presents to us today's gospel. It's famously known as the parable of the wicked tenants. And Jesus is using an analogy for a vineyard for God's people. And somebody had already done that about 8 centuries before, the prophet Isaiah, which of course was our first reading when God compares his people to a vineyard. And in the end of the first reading it says this: "The vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his cherished plant. He looked for judgment but see bloodshed, for justice but hark outcry." In other words, God had done everything he needed for this vineyard to be fruitful. But it wasn't producing grapes, which would be the righteous deeds of God. It was producing wild grapes, unrighteousness, sin. And God is confused because he has done everything he can that we would be fruitful. And then, of course, Jesus tells us the story of the vineyard in the gospel. There are many parallels. The owner is a symbol of God, of course. The vineyard is the city of Jerusalem, or their leaders. And the tenants are the chief priests and the elders. And then the vineyard, the owner of the vineyard sends these servants to them to get the produce, to get the wine. And they beat them, they kill them. And then, if you remember, in every parable, there's going to be something unusual. There's going to be a twist that's going to unlock the whole thing. And for this parable, this father says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to send my son. They'll respect my son. I know I sent servants in the past, and they murdered them, but I'll send my son. Now, if you think about that, that doesn't make any sense. They haven't been good to your servants. They've beaten and killed them. Why on earth would you send your son at this point into the vineyard? And of course, this is not any ordinary father, and this is not any ordinary son. And it says that when the tenants in the vineyard see the son coming, they say, this is the heir. Let us kill him and get his inheritance. But that also seems crazy. Well, would you kill somebody's son and then go to them and say, we killed your son, we'd like his inheritance now. Please give it to us. What? That's crazy. Then, of course, Jesus asked them, what would you do if you were the owner of this vineyard? And the chief priests and elders say, we would kill those wretched men and put them to a wretched death. And Jesus says, the stone that you have rejected has become the cornerstone. Of course, referring to himself, he's now the foundation of the new Israel, which is the church. And we're supposed to be the vineyard of God. In other words, cooperating with God to not only be faithful, but to be fruitful. That our lives would bear fruit. And what kind of fruit are we talking about? It's very simple. That there are people in your life that know Jesus better because they know you. There are people in your life who didn't know Jesus at all, and now they've come to know him through you, by what you say and by what you do. They've experienced the living God through your witness. That's somebody who's living a fruitful life. And they would be doing the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. Basic things: loving our brothers and sisters, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting the imprisoned, consoling the sorrowful, burying the dead. Right? These very simple acts of love for others, which is a sign that we're bearing fruit in our lives. And all the spiritual masters of our tradition say that we have everything in our life right now to have an abundant joy and peace right now. Right now. And I know we think, I don't know. I just think if I had this thing was a little different. If I had that person's story, if I lived during the time of Jesus, I'd be more faithful, and then maybe I'd have that abundant joy you're talking about. But we have everything we need right now to have this abundant joy and peace because God is giving everything we need right now to be not only faithful, but to be fruitful. I never tire of telling the story of the Dominican sisters when they were on Oprah, and she was marveling at the fact that in their theology that they believe that they marry Jesus, and that when they wear their habit, it's like wearing their wedding dress. And she says it to her crowd, and then one of the Dominicans says, yeah, that's great, but of course the only problem with having a perfect spouse is if there's anything wrong in the relationship, you know it's your fault. And that's true for all of us. If we're not, Dr. Peter Crave said, the reason why we're not holy saints is because we don't wholly want to be one yet. That it's never on God's side, it's always on our side. God's A plan for your life is that you become a saint. His B plan, he doesn't have one. That's it. That's his only plan for your life. And the only way that won't become manifest is if we frustrate what God is doing in our lives. And so what has God given to us already that we would be holy, that we would be not only faithful, but fruitful? He gives us all the sacraments. He gives us baptism, that we become children of God, adopted heirs, that we can now cry out, Abba, Father. We can know God as our very own Father. We can pray exactly like Jesus prayed. He gave us confirmation, which means strengthening in Latin, that we're now equipped to be a witness of Jesus by word and deed. And St. Paul says that the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead now lives inside of you, given to you at baptism, sealed in confirmation, that you can be not only faithful, you can be fruitful. And grace centers our souls, the divine life of God in us. We become holy partakers of God's own life. We can fall into sin, serious sin, and destroy that grace in our hearts through mortal sin. But God is merciful. He's given us the sacrament of reconciliation. We can return to him and be brought back to spiritual life through his grace. He's given us all the saints, all their witness, all their intercession. He's given us a guardian angel. He gave us his own mother. And then finally, in a few moments on this altar, he's going to give us himself in the Eucharist. In the parable, they say something crazy. They say, that's the heir. Let us kill him and receive his inheritance. And what God has done for us in Jesus is that we killed the Son of God and we got his inheritance. That doesn't make any sense. This is no ordinary father. This is no ordinary son. God got the consequences of our sin on the cross, and we receive grace and mercy and salvation, and that power is given to us through the church and through the sacraments, and we receive this life. God has done everything he can that we be not only faithful, that we would be fruitful. And so the next time we think to ourselves, gosh, if only I had that person's story, if only this thing were true in my life, I'd be more faithful. I would believe Jesus more. It's not true. It's not true. In that moment, we think, if only I really understand all the gifts that God is giving to me right now so that I could be faithful and fruitful in my life to receive this abundant peace and joy.